lately? Tonight, from Washington, Crossfire. A black eye for CBS? On the left, Tom Brayton. On the right, Pat Buchanan. In the Crossfire, Richard Cohen, columnist for the Washington Post, and Charles Wiley of Accuracy in Media.
Good evening and welcome to Crossfire. Dan Rather went too far, says Sam Donaldson of ABC. It was, quote, repulsive journalism, adds the media critic of the Washington Post. What they're talking about is what the whole country is talking about. Last night's 9-minute confrontation between Dan Rather and Vice President George Bush.
This is not a great night because I want to talk about why I want to be president, why those 41% of the people are supporting me. And I don't think it's fair to judge a whole career. It's not fair to judge my whole career by a rehash on Iran. How would you like it if I judged your career by those 7 minutes when you walked off the set in New York? Well, now, would you like that? I have respect for you, but I don't have respect for what you're doing here tonight.
And here's how the rude exchange ended.
Mr. Vice President, I appreciate you joining us tonight. I appreciate the straightforward way in which you've engaged in this exchange. There are clearly some unanswered questions remaining. Are you willing to go to a news conference before the Iowa caucuses, answer questions from all conferences
since March?
I gather that the answer is no. Thank you very much for being with us, Mr. Vice President.
Now, at that point, switchboards all over America lit up in angry protest at the perceived insolence of the CBS anchorman. But tonight, Dan Rather makes no apologies. So these questions remain. Was George Bush the victim of an ambush interview, or was this legitimate, tough journalism? Should Mr. Bush answer the questions, or should Dan Rather be fired, as thousands of CBS viewers are demanding tonight? Tom?
Mr. Wiley, Accuracy in Media has said that Dan Rather should be fired. Now, I just don't understand. Is there anything more important to this political campaign than to try to discover whether or not the Vice President of the United States, who's a candidate now, should, try to discover whether or not he's lying?
First of all, the real issue is not lying. The real issue here is the arrogance of Dan Rather, who put all journalists in a... I was embarrassed to be in the same field with
Mr. Wiley, the journalists are not judged on whether they're polite. You can hire a maid to be polite. A journalist is judged on whether he asks a question, a pertinent question, of a political candidate. Weren't those pertinent political questions?
Not the way it was set up, they weren't, and the American people, and middle America is in a fury. I spoke at a local meeting of Kiwanians today in Perth Amboy, New Jersey. That's middle America. And there were many people talking about this, and what they were unhappy about was the arrogance. One of them said, you wouldn't have talked this way to a councilman in Perth Amboy.
We're arrogant about asking a man whether he was asleep or forgetful, or wasn't there at a meeting in which arms were thrown around.
Let's bring Richard Cohen. And Richard Cohen, there are two questions here. One of them is the question of Mr. Rather's behavior, but before that, let's get into a question of journalistic ethics. If Mr. Bush, the vice president, was sandbagged, in other words, if he was invited on saying, we're doing a political profile followed by some tough interviews, and the whole thing was an attack ad on Iran-Contra, and every question was on Iran-Contra, it seems to me you got an ethical question of deception on the part of the journalist, and anybody involved in that deception, if it occurred, ought to be fired. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, if there really was a deception. CBS says there wasn't a deception. I believe CBS on this, and I'll tell you something else. The minute George Bush demanded to go live, and CBS said, okay, you can do it live, control passed to George Bush. He knew exactly what he was stepping into. He was going to control the mic. He was going to take over.
I agree.
I don't feel sorry for him.
I knew he knew Iran-Contra was going to come up, but it seems to me what I saw last night on CBS was an attack commercial. 5 minutes hatcheting him on this Iran-Contra, and then every question on it, and I think smoke was coming out of George Bush's ears when that interview started, and it deserved to be, because I think he looked like a guy who was a victim of a vast deception. Don't you agree with that, the analysis?
No, I don't think he looked like a victim at all.
Have you seen the letter that was written to him asking him to take part in the interview?
No.
The letter that came from one of Mr. Rather's associates saying that we have saved you for the end because you're the front runner, and Mr. Rather has taken a personal interest in this, and we are going to put you on just before. This was a setup.
I understand what you're saying, but now let me ask you something. What is so terrible about a journalist asking the Vice President of the United States what he did?
Of course, nothing is wrong with that. That's not the issue.
What is right about a journalist telling the Vice President of the United States, yelling at us, you made us hypocrites in the eyes of the world?
I'm not going to defend that. I think he went over the line.
It was outrageous.
It wasn't good. It was bad.
It wasn't good.
It was wrong of him.
How about the other candidates? Did they have film?
He did make us hypocrites in the eyes of the world.
Tom,
is there anything wrong with a reporter saying that?
You're a commentator. He is a journalist who's interviewing somebody.
I think
it's okay for Gary Hart.
We do. I mean, you can't. He's not going to take our charge.
No, but in the course of a heated exchange, here was George Bush firing back at Rather, taking over the program, setting the line of debate, saying, "Look, I want to discuss education."
You know what,
Dan Rather... Here was Dan Rather on the defensive. So naturally, he got upset.
He came out because he came off as a bigoted liberal, is what Dan Rather came off of, which was not an interview.
That's a redundancy, a bigoted liberal. Come on,
exactly. Good point.
Why are you saying that? Point? Be a liberal.
That's not his point.
Dan Rather, you said that Dan Rather got heated. Dan Rather is supposed to be an objective reporter. Why should he be in a heated exchange with the man that he's questioning? Why wasn't it a simple question and answer situation?
Because Mr. Bush wouldn't answer the question.
Tom,
he went through that whole 7 minutes without answering any of the questions.
Tom, he has answered those questions. The point is...
No, he has not.
No, he hasn't.
Then
why does he keep bringing it up in the debate?
You know why? He's answered the questions. The liberals don't like his answer, so they keep hammering him, suggesting, implying that he's lying. Now, he's answered all the questions.
Alexander Haig is not a liberal. Bob Dole is not a liberal. They keep asking the same question.
They're running for president, and they know...
What does that mean? Does that disqualify them from asking questions?
You know what happens? You fellas are tearing down the Vice President of the United States by hammering him. He's answered all the questions except for what advice he gave. You keep hammering him to drive him down in the polls. I mean, nobody, you don't go out there...
Pat, he has not answered the question. He has never answered the question.
Allow him, for example, to answer some questions. At one point, he said, and it was such an obvious true statement, he said, I may not have been in the room at the time. He said, weren't you at this meeting? Well, wait a minute. I can say that I was at a meeting, and I can also say that if the meeting took an hour, I might have gone to the room.
Mr. Wiley, if you have been to 15 meetings in the Oval Office in which the arms for Iran were discussed, if one of those meetings was a meeting at which the Secretary of State and Mr. Weinberger, the Defense Secretary, blew up, if you have, in addition to that, been to 2 meetings in Israel, went to Jerusalem, and listened to Amram Nir, just a minute, let me finish. Listen to Amram Nir explain to you that this was an arms for hostage deal, and you're running for president, you ought to be able to answer it.
He's answered it, Tom. What you're suggesting is... You're suggesting that his answers are lies. That's the point you're trying to make, and you can go ahead and make it, but you can't say the guy didn't answer.
No. You can also conclude that he's being evasive, and most of the American people, according to the polls, have concluded that he's evasive.
Not most.
Well, 75% to 18%.
Look, if every single night you have the story hammering him on TV about it, Washington Post does takeouts of 50,000 words regularly on the thing. Of course, people are going to reach the conclusion that there's big questions remaining because you say they are, say they are, say they are. Then people say, yeah, I think they are.
Is there a point at which an issue ends? Is there a point at which you've asked the question 1,000 times?
No, not if you don't get an answer.
In other words, you want the answer you want until there is a bitter end battle like there was last night, and we're going to go till we get him, right?
Look, Mr. Wiley, the job of a reporter...
referee? No. What this is all, though, what we're talking about, I think it's legitimate for the Democrats to do exactly what the press is doing, but the press is playing the role of the Democratic Party, attacking George Bush. That's our point.
Look, here's what
did they play the role of the Democratic Party in the case of Gary Hart, attacking him?
You didn't know.
Did we play it with Joe Biden? Pat,
look,
come on,
Pat. Gary Hart was
stories, and you know that.
All right, if it's a story, why didn't the Washington Post print the story it's got right now on Gary Hart?
Which story is that?
You know exactly what I'm talking about. The one where your reporter went up to Gary Hart and said, get out or else we got the goods on you.
We never said that. Our reporter never said that.
Richard, he never said that exactly, but you know what I'm saying.
He never said that exactly. He never said that specifically.
You're being evasive.
I am not being evasive.
I think you are being evasive.
And you're
pushing
me around, and I think you ought to say that he ought to be fired.
Pat, do you respect Bob Dole? Bob Dole says, this shows that the Iran arms sales are going to be a campaign issue.
Bob Dole is running for president. He's got one half of Bush's vote. He's jumping on something the press is doing.
You don't respect Mr. Dole?
No, it's
I
not a
respect
question.
Bob Dole.
That's
That's
Bob Dole's
legitimate.
job.
That's his job.
He's running. Dan Rather, in theory,
was-
is supposed to be objective.
It was Dan Rather's job to get his questions answered and to be aggressive in his questioning,
Let me ask
and he was.
Richard Gordon. I think, you know, Jimmy Snyder, Jimmy the Greek, made one of the great dumb statements of all time at Duke Sievert's about a week ago, I guess. And within hours, he was apologizing left and right, but the axe came right down on his head. No forgiveness, out you go. Now, with Dan Rather, what we got is a thing where the whole country is complaining about. Country didn't raise the devil about Jimmy the Greek. I didn't even hear what he said. But what we got is sort of CBS rallying around this guy who's made an egregious assault on the vice president, and nobody rallying around Jimmy the Greek. Isn't it a case of the establishment protecting its own and dumping one who's not of its own?
No, Pat, they're two different things. Absolutely two different things. In one case, you've got an odds maker who's talking about football on television and makes a remark that
off
sounds...
camera, having nothing to do with
No, on camera.
No, but off
it was
camera, insofar as
doesn't matter. It was on television, which a lot of people say is racially offensive. In the case of Dan Rather, yes, it was, okay? So we can see that. In the case of... Yeah, CBS fired. In the case of Dan Rather, what we're saying is that here's a guy doing basic reporting